The 1970s saw brilliance and tragedy collide in shocking ways. Behind fame, creativity, and ordinary moments, 5 lives ended in circumstances so unusual they still defy belief. These are the haunting true stories of people whose final moments remind us how fragile and unpredictable life can truly be. It remains one of the most haunting assassinations of the Cold War, a killing that fused espionage, science, and secrecy into a chilling act. On a mild September afternoon in 1978, a Bulgarian dissident waiting for a London bus was struck by what felt like nothing more than a pinprick. Within days, he was dead, and the truth behind his killing would unfold into one of the most disturbing and sophisticated political assassinations of the 1970s. On September 7, 1978, 49-year-old Georgy Ivanov Markov, a Bulgarian writer and broadcaster who had defected to the West nearly a decade earlier, stood at a bus stop near Waterloo Bridge in London. Moments before boarding, he felt a sharp sting on the back of his right thigh, as though bitten by an insect. Turning around, he saw a man behind him bending to pick up an umbrella. The man muttered an apology and quickly walked away, hailing a taxi and disappearing into the traffic. Markov dismissed the incident at first, unaware that the encounter had sealed his fate. A few hours later, while at work at the BBC World Service, he noticed a red mark on his thigh and began to feel feverish. His condition deteriorated rapidly that evening. He was admitted to St. James's Hospital in Balham with high fever and severe pain, but despite medical intervention, he died 4 days later on September 11, 1978. The post-mortem revealed something extraordinary. A metal pellet lodged deep in the muscle of his leg. Only 1.7 millimeters in diameter, the sphere was made of platinum and iridium and drilled with 2 microscopic holes that formed a cavity in the shape of an X. Scientists at Porton Down, the British government's chemical and biological weapons laboratory, discovered that the pellet was designed to contain poison sealed in by a wax-like coating that melted at body temperature. They concluded that the lethal substance was likely ricin, a toxin for which no antidote exists. 10 days before the attack, another Bulgarian defector, Vladimir Kostov, had been targeted in a similar manner in a Paris metro station. He survived, but doctors later discovered an identical pellet in his back. The similarities between the 2 cases left little doubt that both men had been marked for elimination using the same weapon. Investigators soon linked the killing to Bulgaria's secret service, which was believed to have acted with technical assistance from the Soviet KGB. Georgy had long been viewed as an enemy of the Bulgarian communist regime. After defecting in 1969, he had become one of its fiercest critics, writing and broadcasting sharp commentaries that mocked and exposed the government of Todor Zhivkov. His programs for the BBC, Radio Free Europe, and Deutsche Welle reached audiences across Eastern Europe, earning him admiration abroad and enmity at home. It was widely suspected that Sofia's leadership ordered his assassination to silence his influence and deter others from defecting. For decades, the case remained officially unsolved. The prime suspect, an Italian-born Bulgarian operative named Francesco Gullino, codenamed Agent Piccadilly, was identified in the mid-2000s through declassified files. He had been recruited by the Bulgarian secret police in the 1970s and had traveled to London shortly before the assassination. Gullino denied involvement when confronted by investigators and journalists, claiming only that he was probably in the city at the time. He was never charged and lived freely across Europe until his death in Austria in 2021. Following the collapse of Bulgaria's communist regime in 1989, caches of specially modified umbrellas were discovered in the Interior Ministry. Several high-ranking officials linked to the country's intelligence apparatus later died under suspicious circumstances, while others were convicted of destroying case files. Despite renewed efforts by Scotland Yard in the 2000s to access Bulgarian archives and question former agents, no one was ever brought to trial. Georgy Markov's death remains an enduring symbol of Cold War brutality, a reminder of how far regimes would go to silence dissent. The weapon that ended his life was never recovered, and many of the documents that could have revealed the full truth were destroyed. Under the bright December sky of 1979, 45,000 fans packed Shea Stadium to watch the New York Jets face off against the New England Patriots. Few could have imagined that what began as a lighthearted halftime show would soon descend into a tragic and bizarre accident, forever scarring the history of the 70s, one that would leave a young man dead and another seriously injured, forever changing how people viewed public safety at such events. The halftime entertainment that day, on December 9, 1979, was provided by a local hobbyist group known as the Electronic Eagles of the Radio Control Association of Greater New York. For $800, they were hired to perform a 15-minute exhibition of remote-controlled airplanes. The group had staged hundreds of such shows before, popular, colorful displays featuring miniature dogfights, intricate flight maneuvers, and novelty aircraft. But on that cold Sunday afternoon, the show did not go according to plan. Almost immediately after takeoff, the strong winds over the open-air stadium began to interfere with the flight paths of the model aircraft. One plane crashed into the football field early in the performance, prompting worried glances from the crowd. Some spectators began to realize how dangerously close the aircraft were flying over their heads. As one fan later told reporters, they were sending those things right over the crowd. It seemed so stupid, so sick to send this thing over these people. Among the pilots that day was Brooklyn auto collision repairman Philip Cushman. His creation, a 2-foot-long red and silver model shaped like a flying lawnmower, had become a crowd favorite at previous shows. The craft, built from magazine plans, looked absurd yet fascinating as it buzzed above the stadium. But what had once been a whimsical crowd pleaser would soon become the cause of an unimaginable tragedy. As Cushman guided his flying lawnmower into the air, it initially performed as expected, circling the field and swooping over the stands. But moments later, witnesses noticed it wobbling unpredictably in the wind. The engine appeared to falter, and the aircraft began flying erratically. Before anyone could react, the lawnmower tilted sharply and nosedived directly into the stands near the Patriots' bench. It crashed with immense force into the fifth row, striking two young men, 20-year-old John Bowen of Nashua, New Hampshire, and 25-year-old Kevin Rourke of Lynn, Massachusetts. Witnesses described the scene as horrifying, comparing the injuries to those caused by an axe or even a grenade blast. Blood and debris scattered across the seats as stunned fans screamed and scrambled for safety. Stadium security and paramedics rushed in as the chaotic moment unfolded in front of tens of thousands of horrified spectators. John, attending his first ever trip to New York City with his younger brother Timothy, was critically injured. Kevin suffered a concussion but remained conscious. Both were rushed to Booth Memorial Medical Center in Queens. John underwent emergency surgery that night for severe head trauma. Despite the best efforts of doctors, his condition did not improve. 4 days later, on December 13, 1979, he died from his injuries. Authorities quickly launched an investigation, but Queens District Attorney John J. Santucci stated that there was no indication of criminal intent. It was ruled a tragic accident, a fatal combination of poor planning, human error, and the absence of safety regulations governing remote-controlled aircraft. At the time, there were no federal restrictions on flying model planes in populated areas. The Federal Aviation Administration had only issued advisory guidelines suggesting operators avoid such locations, leaving enforcement nearly impossible. A spokesman for the Jets organization expressed deep sorrow, calling the death a terrible tragedy. The team soon discontinued all future air shows. 2 years later, John's father, James Bowen, filed a $10 million wrongful death lawsuit against the New York Jets, the Radio Control Association of Greater New York, and Philip Cushman, citing negligence. Today, the death of John Bowen remains one of the most unusual and tragic accidents ever recorded in sports history. A grim reminder of how a moment meant for entertainment turned catastrophic. The flying lawnmower crash at Shea Stadium stands as a haunting chapter from the 1970s, when a simple lapse in judgment turned a spectacle into tragedy and changed the course of one family's life forever. In the turbulent decade of the 1970s, football had its heroes and tragedies, but few stories were as shocking and heartbreaking as that of Luciano Recchiaconi. Known to fans as the Blonde Angel, he was admired not only for his tireless performances on the pitch, but also for his cheerful, light-hearted nature off it. Yet it was that same playfulness, so loved by teammates and supporters alike, that would lead to one of the most unusual and tragic deaths of the 1970s. Luciano Recchiaconi was born on December 1, 1948, in Nerviano, near Milan. A gifted midfielder known for his strength, stamina, and determination, he began his professional career at Pro Patria before moving to Foggia, helping them earn promotion to Serie A in the 1969-70 season. In 1972, he joined Lazio under coach Tommaso Maestrelli, and there he became part of one of the most iconic teams in Italian football. With his energy and commitment, Luciano played a crucial role in Lazio's historic 1973-74 Serie A triumph, the first top-flight title in the club's history. He earned 2 caps for the Italian national team and a place in the squad for the 1974 World Cup, representing a generation of players defined by both talent and personality. Off the field, Luciano was widely known for his humor. In a Lazio squad infamous for its volatility and off-pitch chaos, he was often the calming presence, using jokes to diffuse tension. But that fondness for pranks, harmless fun among friends, would one day cost him his life. On the evening of January 18, 1977, Luciano was in Rome with his teammate Pietro Ghedin and another friend, Giorgio Fraticcioli. The three decided to visit a jewelry shop owned by Bruno Tabacchini, an acquaintance of Luciano's. Before entering, they came up with an ill-fated idea: to pretend to rob the shop as a joke. With their faces partly covered and their hands in their coat pockets as if concealing weapons, they burst inside shouting, "Hands up! This is a holdup!" and laughing. What they didn't realize was that Tabacchini's store had been robbed only weeks earlier. Still traumatized by that event, the jeweler had armed himself, determined to defend his property if attacked again. The prank instantly turned to horror. Terrified and believing he was under real threat, Bruno drew his gun. Pietro quickly raised his hands, but Luciano, still thinking it was all a joke, refused to drop his fake weapon. In panic and fear, Bruno fired a single shot at close range. The bullet struck Luciano in the chest, piercing vital organs. Despite being rushed to a nearby hospital, he died within 30 minutes. He was just 28 years old. His final words were, "It's just a joke. It's just a joke." The incident shocked Italy. A player who had been part of one of Lazio's proudest eras, remembered for his humor and generosity, had died in a senseless misunderstanding. Bruno Tabacchini was arrested but never convicted, as the court ruled that he had acted in self-defense, unaware that the threat was only a prank. Luciano Reciconi's death remains one of the most tragic and unusual events of the 1970s, a story of how one impulsive joke ended the life of a beloved footballer at the height of his career. The blonde angel left behind a wife, 2 children, and a legacy that endures as both a warning and a memory of a brighter, more innocent time in Italian football. He was one of the greatest logicians of the 20th century, a man whose mind reshaped mathematics and philosophy, yet his brilliance was shadowed by deep and growing psychological turmoil. The tragic death of Kurt Gödel in 1978 stands as one of the most unusual and haunting deaths of the 1970s, a stark contrast between intellectual genius and human fragility. Kurt Gödel was born on April 28, 1906, in Brunn, then part of Austria-Hungary. From an early age, he was known for his insatiable curiosity, earning the nickname Herr Warum, Mr. Y. He suffered from frequent illnesses and developed a lifelong conviction that his heart had been permanently damaged after a childhood illness. Brilliant and inquisitive, he went on to study mathematics and philosophy at the University of Vienna, where his exceptional talent soon became apparent. In 1929, he earned his doctorate, presenting the completeness theorem, and 2 years later, at only 25 years old, he published his incompleteness theorems, revolutionary discoveries that transformed the foundations of mathematics. His work demonstrated that no logical system could be both complete and consistent, forever changing the way scholars understood truth and proof. In 1938, Kurt married Adele Nimbursky, a dancer and masseuse 6 years his senior. Despite opposition from his parents, their marriage was happy and enduring. A year later, as Europe descended into war, the couple fled Nazi-occupied Austria and emigrated to the United States. Settling in Princeton, New Jersey, Kurt joined the Institute for Advanced Study, where he worked alongside Albert Einstein. The two became close friends, often walking together and sharing long discussions about science and philosophy. Einstein would later remark that his own work no longer meant much to him. He came to the Institute only for the privilege of walking home with Gödel. Despite his professional success, Kurt's mental health deteriorated over the years. He experienced recurring episodes of anxiety and depression and several nervous breakdowns. After the killing of his friend Moritz Schlick, he developed an obsessive fear of being poisoned. This paranoia would dominate his later life. Convinced that his food was unsafe, he would only eat meals prepared by Adele, trusting no one else. Even while working at Princeton, he often grew suspicious of staff and colleagues, sometimes refusing to attend events or lectures for fear of being harmed. By the late 1970s, his condition had worsened significantly. When Adele was hospitalized in late 1977, Kurt found himself alone, without the only person he trusted to prepare his meals. Isolated and deeply paranoid, he refused to eat anything cooked or handled by others. Over the following months, his weight fell drastically, and he became physically frail. On January 14, 1978, Kurt Gödel died at Princeton Hospital from malnutrition and inanition caused by personality disturbance. At the time of his death, he weighed just 29 kilograms, about 65 pounds. He was buried at Princeton Cemetery beside Adele, who survived him by 3 years. Gödel's death remains one of the most tragic and unusual of the decade, a story of a brilliant man undone by his own mind. His incompleteness theorems changed the very foundations of modern thought, but in the end his life was claimed not by illness or accident but by fear. His passing in 1978 closed a life that had spanned some of the greatest scientific advances of the century, leaving behind a legacy of genius and a haunting reminder of the delicate line between brilliance and despair. In 1978, Terry Kath was a guitarist of extraordinary talent and a founding member of the band Chicago. At 31 years old, Kath was widely admired by peers, with Jimi Hendrix calling him one of his favorite guitarists and even claiming he was the better player. Yet behind the virtuosity and charisma lay a restless, sometimes troubled spirit, whose life would end in an accident that no one could have anticipated. Terry Allen Kath was born on January 31, 1946 in Chicago, Illinois, into a musical family. His father, Raymond, and mother, Evelyn, encouraged his early interest in instruments, which included piano, accordion, banjo, and eventually guitar. By his late teens, Kath was performing with local bands, playing bass before transitioning to guitar, and forming the foundation of what would become Chicago. The band's early recordings showcased Kath's dynamic guitar style, a fusion of rock, jazz, and blues, alongside his soulful Ray Charles-influenced vocals. His presence shaped the band's sound and identity, earning him respect from fans and fellow musicians alike. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, Kath and his bandmates achieved unprecedented success, releasing hit albums and chart-topping singles that would define the era. Despite his achievements, Kath struggled privately with alcohol and illegal substance use, and some within his circle noticed a growing unhappiness. Yet his friends and bandmates insisted he was not at risk of ending his own life. On the night of January 22, 1978, Kath spent hours in reflective conversation with percussionist Laudir de Oliveira, appearing calm and thoughtful as they discussed music and future projects. The following day, January 23rd, Kath attended a small gathering at the home of roadie Don Johnson in Woodland Hills, Los Angeles. Known for his interest in firearms, Kath began handling guns, spinning his unloaded .38 revolver on his finger and playfully pulling the trigger. Johnson expressed concern, cautioning him, but Kath dismissed the worry and switched to a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. Demonstrating what he believed was an empty weapon, he inserted the magazine and assured Johnson it was safe, joking, "What do you think I'm gonna do? Blow my brains out?" Tragically, unknown to Kath, a round remained chambered. When he pulled the trigger, the gun discharged, killing him instantly. He was just 8 days shy of his 32nd birthday. Kath's death had immediate and profound effects. He left behind his wife, Camelia Ortiz, and their young daughter, Michelle, who was only 2 years old. The members of Chicago were devastated, considering disbanding entirely, as Kath had been central to the band's identity and sound. Persuaded to continue by mentors and friends, they went on to release their next album, Hot Streets, dedicating the song Alive Again in his memory. Kath's virtuosity and influence endured in the work of his bandmates, but his absence marked a significant turning point in Chicago's trajectory, leading to a period of decline before the band eventually regained momentum. His life and career continue to be celebrated through documentaries, retrospectives, and recordings, serving as a poignant reminder of both his extraordinary talent and the tragic circumstances of his death. Terry Kath's passing is remembered as one of the most unusual and heartbreaking deaths of the 1970s, a fatal misjudgment that ended the life of a gifted musician whose potential seemed limitless. It was a tragic final act for the guitarist once described as the soul of Chicago, leaving a legacy of music and admiration that endures decades later.